1045 The Team and 1045theteam.com. And joining us now, you can hear him on ESPN New York, 98.7. Bill Daughtry joined us, and we're going to talk about his connections to the Capital Region in a little bit. But first, we lead things off with the parting of ways of Phil Jackson and the New York Knicks. Bill, did they get this right? Was it time for Phil to go in New York?
Let me tell you what, it was past time. Knick Nation felt like they were being held hostage. It was going to be 2 more years of Phil or 2 more years of Melo. And as things work out, the NBA is a players' league. You throw the fiasco on top of all this that was going on with Kristaps Porzingis. No general manager, no team president in the NBA is going to be at odds with the top 2 players, never mind the top player, but the top 2 players on his roster, and survive that. And it was a bit of a mild surprise that he gets dismissed because James Dolan was on our radio station. He was on the Michael Kay show back in February, and I'm sure you guys and everybody else have played the highlight of Dolan saying, we sat down, we made a 5-year commitment, we'll revisit that commitment at the end of the 5 years. So everybody thought that, Phil's going to be here. He's like rock and roll. He's got 2 more years to go. But then when the Carmelo buyout stuff comes up, Dolan says he didn't want to do it. Well, and it's time to make a decision. So Dolan gets the cheaper buyout, I guess. Instead of the $54 million for Carmelo, it's the 24 with whatever settlement figure that he owes Phil Jackson for the next 2 years.
Yeah, it seems very conflicting here that James Dolan thought he was going to stick around and now Phil's out the door. Was Phil the biggest issue for the New York Knicks, or does it go all the way to the top with James Dolan?
No, Phil was the biggest issue. This is Dolan's management style. I mean, he always wants to bring in a big name. And from the day that Phil Jackson signed the dotted line after repeated efforts, because it was no secret that Phil Jackson didn't want the job. He just wanted the money, and Dolan just offered him more money that he could walk away from. So he ultimately said yes and just babysat it for 3 years, but was basically a $12 million a year shield for James Dolan, allowed him to go out and play with his band, the Straight Shot, and do whatever he wanted to do. And, I mean, he had Isaiah Thomas at one point. He had Donnie Walsh at another point. You look at what he did with the Rangers, with Glenn Sather. He always had that big Hall of Fame type name that stood between he and the team, so the media had to deal with that big Hall of Fame name as opposed to dealing with Jim Dolan. And that was pretty much the genesis of how and why Phil Jackson got the job. And I mean, 3 years ago, everybody thought it was a perfect hire. Here comes the guy with more championships than anybody not named Bill Russell. And, he started with the New York Knicks. He came out the same year Walt Clyde Frazier did. Walt Frazier, Pat Riley, and Phil Jackson all came out of the same 1967 NBA draft. And it's so, and what the heck, throw Earl Monroe in there, too, because he was the number 2 pick that year. And all 4 of those men have gone on to carve their niche in professional basketball. But Phil Jackson was a no-brainer, the native son, the homecoming guy who won all those games as a coach, who won all those championships as a coach. But coaching and being an executive, as we've seen, at least in the case of Phil Jackson, are 2 totally different arenas.
You can hear him mornings on 98.7 ESPN. Bill Daughtry joins us here on Levack Goz on 1045 The Team.
Bill, who do you think is going to take over for Phil's position in the front office?
I'm hoping that it's Steve Mills. I've not always been a Steve Mills fan, but I've watched him come of age, so to speak, during the Phil Jackson era. I'm not so sure if Allen Houston has those kinds of executive chops or is ready to display those coming up as a general manager of the D-League, Westchester Knicks. I'm not sure if he's that guy. I'm more inclined to deal with Steve Mills. Mills has a great reputation around the league. He's worked in the league office with the players. He's a guy who knows the landscape, and I really think that this may be his time, the perfect time. He's also pretty close to Dolan because, remember, he ran the Garden for a number of years when Isaiah Thomas was coaching there, and that turned out to be a disaster. But still in all, I've watched Steve Mills develop as an executive. I like his temperament. I like his knowledge of the players. I like his knowledge of the league, how things work. He's kind of like been an apprentice for the last 3 years, but doing the heavy lifting for Phil Jackson. I would like to see Jim Dolan reward him with the spot. I mean, out of all the other names that are thrown around, Griffin, Masai Ujiri, you name it, I mean, I think Steve Mills can be as good as any of them.
Let's say it is Steve Mills. If Mills gets the job, is it more likely we see Porzingis, Melo, and maybe even Derrick Rose all come back to the Knicks next season?
The Derrick Rose thing is intriguing. I mean, think about this for a second. The Knicks started off 14-10 last year. All of the elements of that 14-10 league, if they re-sign Rose, are in play. And I mean, going into last season, Mark Berman of the New York Post wrote a great story yesterday. And he talked about at this time last year, Knicks were going to Summer League. There was a ton of optimism about what this team could be. Well, all those elements are back. And Akinla, the number one draft pick, I don't know what he's going to be. But all the elements of that 14-10 team, if Rose resigns, are back and able to play free and unfettered. I think we find out what kind of coach Jeff Hornacek ultimately is. And I'd like to think with some talent, he could be a good coach. And the disaster that the Knicks turned out to be last year, I just wonder how different last year would have been if Joakim Noah had been healthy all year long. Just from the standpoint, he was brought in to be that defensive anchor. He was brought in for that kinship with Derrick Rose. I mean, remember, when Rose disappeared for one game, when he went home to Chicago, who was the guy who told everybody where he was? Joakim Noah. Mm-hmm. So, Noah's starting out the season rehabbing an injury. If he can come back and find a way to be on the floor for 60 games for the New York Knicks this year, who's to say just how much of a defensive presence he could be, a presence that was sorely missing last year. This is a team that averaged 106 points a game. Most nights in the NBA, that wins if you play some defense.
You can hear him mornings 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. on ESPN New York 98.7. Bill Daughtry joins us here on the phone lines on 104.5 The Team. And before he was on in the big city, he was right here in the capital region. Bill, tell us some of your favorite memories from working here in the 518 in the Albany area.
There's one memory above all that stands out. Albany was where I got my first yes. It was where I got my first yes to work on the college radio station at State University of New York at Albany. I can't recall I think it's WCDC or whatever now it is now. I don't know what the calls are. As it is FM, it is fully grown. But when we were there, it was WSUA, 6:40 a.m., carrier current radio. Had to be plugged in to an outlet in the dorm to hear us. From there, we worked during the summers at WRPI, great radio station at Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, 91.5. Still to this day, one of the best radio stations I ever worked at. And I got my first professional opportunity at WPTR, 1540 AM. Ralph Iannotti was the news director at the time. His air name was Bruce Wayne. I still remember the bat phone, the newsroom phone. Our phone number was 456-0610. It's probably still that 518 area code. Ralph Iannotti, when he left Albany, went to Pittsburgh. He is still working to this day at the CBS affiliate down there. I haven't spoken to him in many years. There was a gentleman named Aaron Shepard at WROW, which was a CBS affiliate at the time. He referred me to Bruce Wayne, and those are my most pleasant memories of the great city of Albany. I do come back on occasion. I still have some college friends there, so Albany is not totally off my radar. You all have grown up. You all are big time now.
We appreciate your time, Bill. The next time you're here in the capital region, you let us know. We'll have some fun together. Bill Daughtry, 98.7 ESPN New York. Appreciate your time, man. Talk again soon.
Tom, Matt, it was always a pleasure to talk to you guys. Anytime. Thanks.